I'm going to read a couple sections from this story, which is called The Violet Hour. Stephen, Texas night, 24 years old, bulleting the ancient Buick down a straight arrow road that narrows in the dark. The world to either side extinguished. A tunnel trisected by headlights, reflections of coyote eyes, road signs, 300 miles to anywhere. A long canal through which the car glides in car silence. A canal, Stephen thinks, lighting a cigarette with the butt of the old. A birth canal, yes, he likes that. From old life to new, immaculate conception. He's got to write that down sometime, maybe in a postcard. Stephen Hawkins, he makes sure to say, not Hawking, not to be confused with the mega scientist, that guy in the chair talking in that skin-crawling computer voice, crippled by an unthinkable disease. He thinks of him often, Stephen does, S. Hawking, people forever pointing out the coincidence. Kept alive by machines, communicating through machines, God only knew how he ate or went to the bathroom. The scientist genius, the greatest living mind, a virtual machine. What does that tell us? Stephen might ask. Not sure what he's insinuating, only that it's dark. Not me, he says to the empty car, peers through insect-smeared glass at a steel firmament, the inert cosmos that wrecked his namesake. No, sir, he says, twists on the AM radio, flicks the cigarette out the window. Soon he'll be on the beach, sipping margaritas. No machines, only flamboyant sunsets and bikinis, limitless possibility. What need for science? But there are dreams of a hospital bed with open manacles, of a broken planetarium, constellations and nebulae frozen on the dome. The idea that in some way that is him, talking into a voice box, typing with his tongue. Hawkins, not Hawking, he says. Totally different names. Besides, he says, it's Stephen with a V. So he's on this cross-country trip, moving out to California, and somewhere outside of Santa Fe, he picks up these two hitchhikers, two women whose car is broken down. This old, very strange woman named Carla, who's in a wheelchair, and she has a companion, a woman named Gracia, who Stephen decides is the most beautiful woman he's ever seen. And he picks them up, and Carla's just real strange, and he's telling her about the trip, and she says, "Are you trying to find yourself?" He says, "Well, yeah, I guess that's part of it." And she looks at him and says, "That's all of it." And just before he drops them off, they invite him to come meet them for dinner in the city, in Santa Fe. So he goes to his campsite, gets stoned, and comes find them. Santa Fe at dusk, ochre and mauve sunset lingering between buildings, the main square, a whirlwind of pigeons. Stephen finds himself standing before a heavy door with a braided gold handle. He finds them in the back room, brick walls and grapevine-strung arches, a fireplace, 20 people at a long table, women in western shirts with rhinestones, men in bolo ties. Gracia sits with her back to the fire, returns his moron grin with a blink. "Nice to see you again," he decides to say, but his mouth is so dry he manages only to gape. "You must be Steve." A large man rises toward him, a cowboy type in his 60s, graying mustache, sleeves rolled to the elbows. Strapping is the word that comes to mind. "Bill Washburn," the man says. Stephen shakes his hand, still watching Gracia. "Sit down," Bill says. "Join us. I want to hear all about this trip of yours. Sounds terrific." "I kind of got lost," Stephen confides. "I forgot the name of the street." At the other end of the table, Gracia is statue still, her thick eyelashes, the long curve of her neck. He could go to her now. Let's get out of here. They could flee to the coast, her hair blowing out the window. They could dive madly together into the cool ocean. Such things can happen. The new universe is still hot, still expanding. Its laws are not yet fixed. A waiter brings wine. Bill raises his glass. "Here's to Steve, our new friend." "Hear, hear," call the other guests. 20 voices muttering in weird syncopation. Or maybe he's just stoned. "Tell me all about this trip," Bill repeats, the other faces leaning in. Even Gracia looks up. It's just a road trip, nothing special, Stephen says. He takes another sip of wine and describes the heat in Texas. Like a fist, he says, hammering. The empty plane at night. How you felt as if you were the only person left in an unconscious universe. Unconscious? Says a woman to his left. The man next to her raises his eyebrow. It was like there was just so much space, Stephen answers, thinking about the scientist and his book. You just start to wonder, about it all, whether there's an end to it, what's outside that end. Yep, the man across the table, wire-rimmed glasses and a comb-over, nods his head. You sure do. I did the same thing just like you, Washburn is saying. Up and left, 20 years old, I went off to find myself, just like you. Well, I'm not really, that's not... Stephen begins, but Washburn keeps talking. Chicago, Philadelphia, Vietnam, back to Durango, and all along, the sense I hadn't learned something, that there was something out there I needed to know, or something I already knew, but didn't know I knew. You know what I mean, Steve? The water glass is empty. Stephen cranes his neck for the waiter. The same dizzy feeling, not that this has happened before, but that it's happening makes sense. That feeling, Washburn says, like something just beyond your grasp, you understand? And all you need to do, he lunges forward and snatches at the air in front of Stephen's face, is reach out for it. Sure, Stephen says, sure I do, I know what you mean. Somewhere there's an accordion playing, but he can't tell if it's real or piped in. Here's what I'm saying, Bill says, pushing back. Where is it you think you're going to find yourself? Where is it you think you might have got to? He examines Stephen's face, grasps the side of Stephen's chair and shakes it. Little lamb, he grins, dost thou know who made thee? Someone down the table stifles a laugh. Stephen feels his mouth hanging open. People talk about finding God too, Steve, he says, don't they? Her beatific smile, the idea of her skin, Stephen wills Gracia to rise. He can see this happening. How can you find something that isn't lost, Bill says, when there's something right there with you all the time, inside, outside, everywhere you turn? You don't lose it, now do you? Thick arms to either side, penning him in. You get what I'm telling you here? Stephen gropes for the water glass, mouth terribly dry. God? He finally croaks. Bill nods slowly, leans back. The Lord himself, he says, old J.C., you betcha. The universe began from a point of zero volume, of infinite density. There was nothing outside the singularity. As its edges raced outward, all space came into being. What place then, Hawking had asked, for a creator? What comes to fill all that space, wonders Hawkins. Stephen, head swimming. 5 days ago he was elsewhere, had never seen Gracia. Now this restaurant in the desert, these strangers, this heat. The man in the red shirt says, tell him about the butterfly. Washburn lifts his wine glass and drinks it to the bottom. All the damn scientists, he says. They can't even predict the weather. You know why? Stephen shakes his head. He realizes he desperately has to go to the bathroom. Because of a butterfly. Dynamic instability. Something about Indonesia. Stephen in a light sweat. Gracia has not opened her eyes. What are you talking about, he says. What am I talking about? Science. These so-called scientists with their theories. Order, disorder. Now they think they've solved it. You know what the answer is? 4.66, says Bill. How do you like that? The man across the table lets out a guffaw. Stephen turns to find Carla's face, her wine-red lips, her eyes gigantic and distorted behind her glasses. Let me ask you something, Bill says. You've got these numbers, these equations, but what puts them into action? What gives them a world to describe? Now Gracia opens her eyes and stretches her arms above her head. They could run, drive, Stephen thinks. They could swim in the ocean. Nothing determines the future, he thinks. Nothing sets it in stone. Your buddy asked the same question, Washburn says. What is it that breathes fire into the equations? That's the big question, Steve. You think you're going to find out by running around, smoking dope, chasing pussy? Stephen tries to run for the bathroom. Bill pushes him back into the chair. Boy, do I have a book for you, he says. Right, sure, Stephen tries to say, struggling out of the chair, thinking, just let me up before I piss myself. "You want to get up?" Bill says. "Get up." The room's silent except for the hiss and spark of fire. Stephen wobbles up from the chair, half expecting to be pushed back. But Bill takes his elbow and heads for the door. Gracia raises a hand to her lips and blows a kiss. Through the open door into cool night, a dark street, Stephen reaches for his cigarettes and feels a blow between his shoulders, and then he's falling. He doesn't know where his legs are. The pavement is racing up at him. He cringes, but a hand covers his face, flips him so he hits the ground softly. Before he can react, he's flipped again, ankles twisted and pulled up behind his back. He opens his eyes and sees only concrete and the fabric of his own pants. Something is squeezing his throat, bending his legs until he feels his back will snap. Then a voice in his ear. "Stop struggling," it says. "Only makes it hurt worse." He tries to kick out, but pain shoots up his spine. "Just relax and it'll stop hurting," Bill says. Stephen sucks air and wills his body to relax. "That's better," says Bill. Stephen, snotty-nosed, to a Santa Fe sidewalk. The unsmoked cigarette inches from his face. The hands release him, the weight lifts, blood rushing behind his eyes. He feels himself about to black out, hides his face in his hands. "Learned that one in Da Nang," Washburn chuckles. "It works every time." The group begins to file out of the restaurant. Their faces register nothing out of the ordinary. Gracia wheels the old woman over the threshold. Stephen wipes his nose, his eyes. He tries to leap up at Bill and knock him to the ground, but Bill's hand presses on his shoulder so he can't get his legs under him. "Not so tough as you thought, are you?" Bill says. A hot sob bursts through. Stephen grits his teeth and smacks a fist into Bill's thigh. "Rule number 1, says Bill, as Gracia turns away and slowly pushes the wheelchair back toward the plaza. "Know your own strength." And stop there. Thank you all very much.